Hi everyone and welcome to Power and Freedom. I'm Elena Hunt. Thank you for being here with me today. If you're watching live, drop me a comment, a love, a like, let me know that you're here. If you're watching on replay, then welcome. If you do have any questions along the way or any comments to make, do drop them in because I will come back and check those as we go. So thank you for those of you who are joining me today. So the topic today, I wanted to carry on with the series that we've been doing over the last 2 or 3 weeks. And today's topic is called the language keys. Now, if you've been around the world of personal development or spirituality or inspiration, you've probably heard the idea of I am statements. And basically what that is that means that we'll say I am, and anything that comes after that is like a creative statement. It's really making impacting the results of our life. And we can use I am statements to create a better life for ourselves. You know, we can say really positive things. So I am successful, I am loved, I am, you know, whatever you put after I am can become a truth for you. But we can also follow how we're talking now, how we're saying things and how we're expressing ourselves so that we can begin to work backwards and find out how the words that we're saying and the language we're using, how those things are actually creating the results of our life right now. Learn to discover what's going on so that we can begin to change that as well. Language is so important. Language is very powerful. Words are very, very powerful. And when we're stating things outside of ourselves, it's a reflection of what we're thinking or what we understand or what we believe. And so those are levels that are often in our unconscious or in our subconscious that we might not recognize or be aware of. And so we want to become aware of what we're thinking or what we believe. And when we do that, we can begin to shift it. We can begin to change it. We can change how we're speaking. We can change the words we say. So I wanted to go back to the idea of I am statements, you know, and although we can use those for positivity, they're also signposts or keys to help us understand what we're saying, what we're thinking, what we actually fundamentally understand. And often when we speak, we don't say I am, we use the abbreviation and we say I'm this or I'm that. And so some of the sorts of things that you might find yourself saying, depending on where you are in your journey and how you use language, but you may find that you say things like, I'm stupid, oh, I'm so dumb, you know, oh, I look fat in this, or I'm fat, or I'm too slow, or and whatever comes after I'm is a creative statement, whether you're using it to powerfully change your life or whether you're beginning to recognize what it is that you're saying now that's having a big impact on what's actually showing up in your life. So when we say I am, everything that comes after it is a creative statement. We are more or less saying to the universe, this is true. And to your brain, this is true. And your brain will always deliver you what you ask it to. So if you say I'm dumb, it will look around and it'll find examples to prove to you that, yeah, you're dumb. And you're not at all. But because at some level, perhaps somewhere a long time ago, someone's told you that you are, you begin to believe that and it becomes a truth for you. So those creative statements, the I am statements or the I'm statements, are very, very powerful in creating the results that are showing up in your life right now. And there's something else that I wanted to talk to you about as well. Another thing that we often find ourselves saying, and really what I'm trying to do here today is give you some little tips, I suppose, some keys, I call them, to help you begin to see how you're speaking. And so that as you go forward, if you hear me today and you take on board some of what has been said, one of the things I wanted to talk about is these keys to help you begin to recognize in some of how you're speaking and in the language that you're using, things that perhaps are sitting underneath. So some beliefs and some understandings that are at a core in your operating system, actually in your brain, deep down in your subconscious, that you're not aware of. So one of the other things that you can watch out for is the statement that says I know, and so they're usually followed by something, right? So I know that whatever comes after that is something that you believe. Because when you say I know, it's not like I think or maybe or perhaps. I know is like a fact. It's an absolute. I know. And even if after you say it, you think, well, I don't really believe that, somewhere deep down there's a connection that's showing up. And it may not be something that you're aware of. It could just be some connection in the background that's playing, that when you catch yourself saying, I know, you can begin to sort of go, actually, that's not true for me. I'm not, I'm watching. When I say I know, whatever comes after it, it's telling me something. It's like a feedback system. And so you can use these things as keys to kind of unlock what's happening. So anytime you might say, I know that, whatever else comes after that is something that you believe or you deeply understand. Another way you might use I know is you might say, I know you. So you might say, I know you are da, da, da. So whatever comes after that, what are we going to call that? That's really a judgment statement. Sometimes it's said in a positive way, but it's really only your perception and your understanding of somebody else that you've decided is true. You've taken this understanding or this thing that you think is true and you've made it a fact at some level, because the way that you're phrasing it when you say, I know you. So you might say, I know you have a heart of gold. You might say, I know you struggle with anything around any of that. I know you is a statement that you're making about an understanding you have about somebody else. And you need to kind of question whether that's actually true. And then another thing that we say is, I know we. So when we're in a relationship with someone else, we often use the word we, and it's nice to be inclusive, I know sometimes, I think especially when you get into relationships when you're a bit older, you kind of often get used to saying, talking about yourself in the first person. But when we often talk in relationships, we talk in we, yeah? There's more than one of us. And so we might say, I know we. And then what happens there? What you've done in that moment, and you could be absolutely correct. It could be based on something you guys have talked about and that's very true for both of you, but it might not be. It could be that you've actually made an assumption or made a perception about somebody that you're with, and in actual fact, it isn't true, but you've formed an opinion or you've formed a belief or an understanding about this person in relationship to yourself, and the we, because there's you, there's the other person, and together you're we. It's almost like another person is formed. And so when you say, I know we, have a think about whether it's actually true for you and whether it's actually true for that other person, or are you making a statement where you've taken your perception and you've projected that onto somebody else? Now, that's not a problem per se, but what we're talking about here is finding some keys to help you unravel the things that you believe and understand, because that's where we live our lives from. Those are the things that are creating the results of our lives. And when you think about relationships, if you are forming understandings about what your relationship is about, and then using we statements, I know we, and if that statement that you've said after the we isn't true for the other person, you're projecting your own stuff, and you're going to have an impact on that relationship. That thought, that belief, that understanding is going to impact that relationship, maybe for good, depending on the statement, and possibly it's going to be harmful. And so what actually happens is, because your brain needs to prove that what you know is true, yeah, I know we, then you will begin to see instances when what it is that you think or say that you know is actually proved to be true, and that can be very damaging in your relationship. So have a look at how you are using I know we. It's quite a powerful statement when you're in a relationship with somebody else, because you're not inside their head, you don't have their core understandings, you really don't know what's true for them. And a lot of the time we use this, and really it's just our own understandings that we're projecting onto the situation, rather than it being something that's true for them. Okay, and the other one I've got here is I know I, and it's very similar to the I'm statement that we started with, or the I am statement. But I know I, you might say something like, I know I struggle with, or I know I'm not as young as I used to be, or whatever it is. And okay, you might not be as young as you used to be. You know, we're all getting older minute by minute by minute. But when you put an age out there, if you say, I know I'm not as young as I used to be, but you're kind of giving yourself a bit of a limit, really. You're sort of going, well, you know, the fact that I'm older, I know I shouldn't be able to do this, but I'm going to do it, you know. Anytime that you catch yourself saying, I know that, I know you, I know we, I know I, any statement that starts with I know is a key. Stop, take a moment, have a think about what you're saying. What is it that you, what are the words around the I know? What are you saying after I know? And is that actually true? You know, those things that you're saying to yourself, is it absolutely true? And a very similar one that you can also have a look at when you're speaking is I'm sure. Because I'm sure is just like saying, I know. I'm sure that, you know, I'm sure you, I'm sure we, I'm sure I, whatever comes after it, I'm sure. When you're sure about something, you know it absolutely, don't you? You know it to be true with every ounce of energy that you have. You know, you're making it out as an absolute factual statement. And so when you say I'm something or I am something, you say I know or I'm sure or I am sure. Whatever comes after it is something that you absolutely believe, whether you're aware of it or not. Somewhere within your subconscious or unconscious mind, or even perhaps somewhere, you know, slightly back in your brain that you might be denying that you actually think that way, because, you know, we're good at doing that too, aren't we? You know, there's something there, that there's a connection in your brain that it feels true for you on some level. So it's really helpful to watch what you're doing with your language, listen to yourself, catch yourself when you say some of these things, because you can use those as keys to kind of unlock what it is that you think, what it is that you understand, and what it is that you believe. And I said, you know, just a moment ago that when you say something like I'm sure, it's an absolute truth to you. When you speak like that, it's something absolute. And so I wanted to draw your attention to some words that are absolutes. And when we use them, we are making them very true in our lives. You know, there's lots of things that we can say where we allow room for it to be different, that there's a possibility that it's not how we think it is. But there are certain words and certain statements that we make that are absolute, and they leave no space for the possibility of any other truth. It is basically, we are stating it as a truth for us. And they usually come in opposites, like opposite ends of the scale. So I'll give you an example. Words like always or never. So when you say, I always do this, you're saying this is something that there's no room for anything else. I always do this every single time, not sometimes or once in a while, but always. And the word always is a powerful statement. It's based in perhaps a narrow view, but a view that is very strong, very definite, kind of a bit like a groove, you know, then you're just going in the same groove. So I always, or I never. In either case, they're either ends of a scale, and what they're actually telling you is you're not giving any space for it to be different. You've decided this is how it is, and somewhere in you, you absolutely believe that this is always how it is. This is, and therefore it's never going to change, or there's never any instance where it's anything else. And they're really good words to pick up on, because often those words come from a long time ago when we have very black and white thinking when we're a child. Things are either good or they're bad, or they're, you know, absolutely terrible or amazingly fantastic. And so when we get these words that are kind of polar opposites, they're telling us some things that are going on in our brain or in the back of our brain. Another one is nobody. So you might say, I mean, it was an old poem I had as a kid, and I won't tell you the whole poem, but it says, you know, nobody loves me, everybody hates me. And then there was a poem that came with that. So when you say nobody and everybody, again, you can see you've got this power behind it. You know, even just when you say the word nobody, it's like excluding everybody. And then you say everybody, you're including everybody. But we're all individuals, aren't we? And, you know, it's just not true. It's not possible for it to be true. But when you're talking like that, when you're showing up and you're saying nobody and everybody, and it's something I've noticed in myself that, you know, I'm working to change, because there is a language pattern that at times I do say nobody or everybody. And, you know, it's not helpful because, of course, it's not true. But you're making it true every time you say it, because you're reinforcing an understanding that whatever it is you're saying applies to everybody or it applies to nobody. And of course, the good old one that's true or false, you know, and it's the same thing. Your polar opposites, you know, well, that's just false or that's true. It's an absolute statement. There's no room for a different opinion or for it to be any different. Must and mustn't. I must do this. I mustn't do this. Again, right and wrong. And you also, when you say must, it's like you're kind of telling yourself off. I must do this. It's like I must do it. I have to do this, or I mustn't do it. And it's really quite judgmental and it's really harsh. And so when we say things like that, we're giving ourselves a hard time, but it's really coming from a place where we feel like we're not doing what we should be doing, but we must do this. Or the same if you say should or shouldn't. I should do this, but I shouldn't do that. They're kind of judgment statements. You've perhaps formed an impression or some sort of understanding of how things should be. It's generally got nothing to do with you. It's generally got to do with other people's opinions or societal's opinions or, you know, whatever like that. But at some point, you know, it's not about you. So when you say must and mustn't or should or shouldn't, there just isn't the room for you to be you and to question, well, what do I actually want? You know, it's kind of like saying, well, I must do this. I have to do this. It's like being a child and being told what to do, and you're kind of beating yourself up when you're doing that. So, you know, these are some of the things you can start to look out for. So when you start, if you start to listen to how you're speaking, when you're just speaking in your everyday life, when you're talking to people around you, you can begin to identify some of these sorts of ways of phrasing things or ways of speaking, and it'll help you if you stop when you say it and you listen to what other words are being used around it, then that's the key to tell you what it is that you understand or what it is that you believe, and you can begin to shift it. You can begin to shift your language. You know, if you can say all the I am statements in the world and all the affirmations in the world, and I think affirmations are a wonderful thing. But if you're also at the same time continuing to say the negative statements that are the opposite side of that, or to talk about what you know, even though you're trying to change something, if you haven't got the awareness that you're also saying the opposite, you've got to think about it. You know, if you've got two ends, it's like fire and water, they kind of put each other out. So if you're saying a negative statement and you're trying to say a positive statement at the same time, they kind of negate each other. So, but when you become aware that you're making these absolute statements, you know, I am, I know, what else did I have down here? I'm sure, or, you know, the always, never, nobody, everybody. When you begin to understand that and pick up that you're saying these things, you can begin to shift them, and then your positive affirmations really can start to work, because you've got to kind of remove the negative part in order for the positive part to really build. But you can keep saying it over and over again, and it will build its own momentum. But I just think it's so much more powerful and useful for you if you can pick up on these other words that you're also saying, other ways of phrasing language that are creating the reality of your life, excuse me, because they are creative statements. And every time you say it, whatever comes afterwards is a truth. And by saying it out there in the world, you've got the opportunity to say, well, no, it's not a truth, actually. I'm going to have another look at this. This is a key here to tell me. This key can unlock some understanding or belief that I didn't know I had that's actually standing in the way of what I want or is hindering me in some way. So when you hear those things, remember the key, grab the key out of your pocket or, you know, off the hook on the wall, wherever you decide to put that key, and begin to unlock what's around it. And as you begin to become aware, you instantly can ask yourself if it's true. And if it's not true, it doesn't belong. And the minute you've decided it's not true, you're not going to say it. You're not going to say it anymore. You might hear an echo of it for a little while because it can be quite deep-seated and you know, quite deeply programmed. But at the end of the day, you're beginning to shift it just by acknowledging that it's not true for you, and beginning to change the statements, replace it with something that is true for you. So that's the language keys, and that's how we can begin to follow what we're doing, what we're saying, and begin to understand what's sitting underneath it and what are the core things that are driving our behavior, because we'll always act from the things that we believe and the things that we understand, you know, and as I've talked about before, those things that you know or that you're sure about, accompanying those are emotions and feelings, and those have power in your life as well. And you're kind of on the super highway. So when you have a think about these words and these little statements and see if you can add those into your life, so that actually what you can do is you can begin to shift, become aware and shift that, and unlock those beliefs and patterns and understandings that are sitting deep in your subconscious that are actually creating the results of your life. Because hey, you know, if there's things that are coming up that aren't working for you and aren't aligned with where you want to go and the life you want to live, you can change that, you can shift that. And I'd like to encourage you to have a think about how you might be able to use the language keys. Think about what you're saying, and begin to shift some things so that you can open the possibility for something more than what you know right now. And see where it takes you, because it can almost be a little bit magic. And that's why I call it a key, because it really does unlock some powerful things that can change in your life and create much more happiness and well-being for you. So that's our talk today. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will speak to you all again then.